The way we create the worlds we experience. Have you ever noticed that we open our eyes and in one sense, in terms of color and texture and shape and form and all the rest, we all see, at least human beings see, pretty much the same thing. So in that sense, we're all occupying the same world. And yet, it doesn't take very long to be in this world before we realize that even though we seem to be in the same world, that we're actually in extraordinarily different worlds from one human being to the other. Something like this becomes sort of ludicrously and absurdly obvious every election cycle. It doesn't take long to realize that people live in very different worlds, do you know? When people go into their debates and all that, do you realize, they're living in slightly different worlds from one another. One political group lives in a different world. They view the world very, very differently. And that's just in the world of politics. That we literally live and experience the world very differently. So someone that's liberal experiences the world very differently than the average person that's conservative. And the person that's conservative experiences the world in a very different way than someone's basic orientation tends to be liberal. And we know this because this has been studied. It's been studied. All the very different political groups, different political orientations, we ask, so how do you see the world? Do you see it as a safe place or a threatening place? And so on and so on and so on and so on. And we find that people, simply because they have a different political persuasion, live in very different worlds. In one sense, we could say we're all in the same world. But for most people, that's a total abstraction. That's not where people actually live day to day and moment to moment. You know, more than likely in your own household or wherever you live, if you live with anybody, you probably have realized you are living with somebody that lives in somewhat of a different world than you do. You can both be in exactly the same house, but as soon as you have a discussion, as soon as you start to communicate, you start to realize there are differences, right? Differences of opinion, differences of belief. And these differences of opinion and belief aren't just simple abstractions, that they actually cause each of us to view the world and feel the world in very, very different ways. It causes us to view ourselves and each other in very, very different ways. And we've been wondering for tens of thousands of years, why human beings don't seem to be able to get along very well. And in one sense, the answer to that, ultimately the answer is quite simple. Relatively, it's very complex, but in a sort of an ultimate sense, one of the reasons, probably the only reason we find it so hard to live together in a sort of peaceful, harmonious way, is because we're actually seeing the world and experiencing the world and feeling the world and each other and ourselves in very, very different ways. And so our people's sense of what's real is very, very different. What you feel and think to be real is very different than what somebody else thinks and to be real. Nowadays it's sort of hip, you know. Oh, everybody has their own reality, you know. No, there's only one reality. That's why we call it reality. We don't get to pick and choose our reality. But we do get to pick and choose our experience of unreality. And what most of us human beings are experiencing moment to moment, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, perhaps even lifetime to lifetime, is for the most part unreality. And so our unrealities are colliding all the time. You don't even have to have another person to collide with. You can collide with yourself. You can have competing realities within your own mind space. You can think you're pretty good one day and you think you're pretty rotten the next day, or maybe the next minute. You can be smart in some way and stupid in another way, and then they compete. You can kind of feel that you're a fairly worthy human being after all, and that you're an absolute scoundrel at the same time. And so there can be not only competition between each other, but the average human being is a competition with themselves, and probably most predominantly with themselves. Because you can hold several different worldviews within your own mind, which compete with each other. Has anybody not experienced this? And we start these sort of worldviews, views on everything. When I say of worldviews, I mean the way we view and think and feel about everything is really what I mean when I say worldview. But this starts it starts as soon as we learn language.